"It's just a bunch of old notebooks, Mom," my son Leo said, his voice tinny and distant over the phone. "The Historical Society can't have them. We need the space for the nursery." The receiver, a heavy black plastic antique I'd refused to replace for 40 years, suddenly felt slick and impossibly heavy in my hand. My knuckles showed white where they gripped the bakelite. I could feel the coiled cord pulling against my wrist, a faint, insistent pressure. A stone, cold and dense, formed just behind my sternum, making it difficult to draw a full breath. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 72 years old. For a moment, the floral pattern of the wallpaper in my hallway, faded roses and ivy I'd known my entire adult life, seemed to swim and blur. If he only knew what he had just so casually, so carelessly thrown away. To understand why those notebooks were everything, you need to know who my husband Robert really was. And to understand that, you need to go back a long, long way. You need to know who I really am. I wasn't born to the quiet, modest life I now lead. I was born into noise and want. My father worked at a steel mill until the day a coughing fit laid him low, and he never got up again. My mother took in laundry, her hands permanently raw and red, the smell of bleach clinging to her like a shroud. We lived in a cramped two-bedroom apartment where the walls were thin enough to hear our neighbors' arguments, and the pipe shuddered and groaned all winter. I learned early that wealth wasn't about diamonds and furs. It was about silence. It was about the peace of not having to worry where the next meal or the next month's rent was coming from. I met Robert in a public library. I was 19, studying to be a nurse, seeking the quiet I craved. He was 21, a physics undergrad on a scholarship, his head perpetually bent over a book. He wasn't handsome in the way of movie stars. His hair was an unruly brown mop. He had a scattering of freckles across his nose, and his glasses were always slightly askew. But he had the kindest eyes I had ever seen, and he had a mind that burned like a quiet star. Our first date was a walk along the river. He didn't talk about parties or sports. He talked about the way light refracted on the water's surface, about the elegant mathematics of a spider's web, about the universe hidden in a single drop of rain. I didn't understand half of what he said, but I understood the passion, the pure, unadulterated joy he took in understanding how the world worked. He became a high school physics teacher, not because he couldn't have done more. His professors begged him to go into academia, into research, but because he believed knowledge wasn't a commodity to be hoarded in an ivory tower. He believed it was a gift to be shared. I still have a clear picture of him coming home from school, the cuffs of his plain button-down shirts permanently stained with the faint ghost of chalk dust, a smile on his face, because a student, a girl who everyone else had written off, had finally understood the concept of inertia. "She got it, Ellie," he'd say, his eyes shining. The light went on. You could see it. His salary was modest. My nurse's salary was modest. But together, we built a life. We bought this small house, the one with the porch steps that have been repaired so many times. Each one is a different shade of weathered wood. It wasn't a showpiece. It was a home. It smelled of the cedar chest Robert built in the hallway, the old books that filled our shelves, and, faintly, the scent of the cherry blend pipe tobacco he smoked only on Saturday nights while he read. His hobby, as he called it, lived in the garage. Other men had fishing or golf. Robert had theoretical physics. He called investing his other hobby, something he did with the same quiet intensity as his primary passion. He'd read obscure financial journals and technical papers with the same focus he gave to his physics books, making small, careful investments in companies no one had ever heard of. "It's all patterns, Ellie," he'd murmur, poring over stock charts like they were cosmic charts, just like the universe. But the garage was his real sanctuary. He'd built a long workbench from salvaged lumber. The air in there was a unique alchemy of solder, ozone from his experiments, and the faint, sweet smell of sawdust. He would spend hours out there, surrounded by oscilloscopes, second-hand multimeters, and coils of copper wire. And he would write. He wrote in simple, spiral-bound notebooks, the kind you buy at the drugstore for $1. He filled them with pages upon pages of dense, elegant equations, complex diagrams, and notes scribbled in his spidery, left-slanting handwriting. It was his real work, the ideas too advanced or too theoretical for his high school classroom. He was exploring the very fabric of energy transfer, of thermodynamics, of the way heat and cold could be moved and manipulated with almost no energy input. "Imagine, Ellie," he said to me once, holding up a smooth, dark river stone he'd been using as a paperweight. "Imagine if you could convince this stone to be warm on a winter's day, not by heating it, but by telling all the cold inside it to go somewhere else, passively, silently." I didn't understand the science, but I understood the dream. Then came Leo, our son, our miracle. From the moment he was born, he was the center of our universe. Robert was a besotted father. I have this one memory burned into my soul. Leo is 5, and he's sitting on Robert's shoulders in the backyard, his small hands tangled in Robert's messy hair. Robert is holding up 2 marbles, one glass and one steel, trying to explain the concept of mass and momentum. Leo wasn't listening to the words. He was just giggling, bathed in the pure, unconditional love of his father. We gave Leo everything we could. Not material things, but time, attention, love. We read to him every night. We helped him with his homework at the kitchen table. We encouraged his dreams. But as he grew older, a subtle distance began to form. He saw his father's quiet life, his modest teacher's salary, his hobby in the garage. And he didn't see passion. He saw failure. He saw a man who could have been a famous scientist, but chose to be a small-town teacher. The world was changing, and Leo was changing with it. He wanted flash, success, the kind of life you saw on television. He wanted what we didn't have, money. Then he went to college and met Charlotte. The first time he brought her home, I knew. It was a feeling in my bones. Charlotte was beautiful, polished, and sharp as a shard of glass. She came from a background not unlike my own. Her father had been a mechanic who lost his job, and she'd watched her mother's humiliation as they lost their home. But where that experience had made me crave peace and stability, it had made Charlotte crave armor. And her armor was wealth, or, more accurately, the performance of it. She walked into our small, comfortable living room, her eyes doing a swift, brutal inventory. I saw her gaze flicker over the worn floral pattern of the armchairs, the slight scuff marks on the hardwood floor, the stack of National Geographics on the end table. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Your home is so cozy." The word hung in the air, a perfect little grenade of condescension. It was the first of many. Over the years, her backhanded compliments became a language of their own. "It's so sweet you still use a percolator," So authentic. That dress is a classic, Eleanor. You must have had it for years. All jobs are dignified, of course. A high school teacher. That's very noble. She didn't see the love that had filled this house. She saw a lack of ambition. She looked at Robert, a man who could have explained the stars to her, and saw only a man who couldn't afford to take her to a Michelin star restaurant. Leo, caught in her orbit, began to change more rapidly. He adopted her language, her values. He was embarrassed by us, embarrassed by our simple car, our quiet street, our life that was built on love and intellectual curiosity instead of stock options and brand names. The financial ledger, as I came to think of it, began the year they decided to get married. They wanted a house, but not just any house. A modern construction in a gated community, a place with a 2-story foyer and a kitchen full of stainless steel. They didn't have the down payment. "Mom," Leo had said, shifting his weight from foot to foot in my kitchen. Charlotte stood just behind him, her hand on his arm, a silent, beautiful predator. "It's 20%. The banks are so tight. We can't swing it on our own." "How much is it?" I asked, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. $150,000, Charlotte said, her voice smooth and certain. Leo flinched at the bluntness of the number. $150,000. It was an astronomical sum. It was more than Robert and I had made in 3 years combined. But Robert had been so careful with his hobby. He had invested in a little-known software company in the 1980s, a company that made operating systems for the first personal computers. He'd sold the stock years later, putting the money into stable, boring municipal bonds. Our what-if fund, he called it. What if the roof collapses? What if one of us gets sick? I looked at my son's face, so full of desperate hope, and at Charlotte's, a mask of polite expectation. I thought of Robert. He would have wanted his son to be happy. He would have wanted to give him a start. So I went to the bank the next day. I cashed in every single one of those bonds. The money I had guarded for 40 years, my security, my peace of mind. I wrote them a check, my hand trembling slightly. The financial ledger had its first entry. Down payment on house, $150,000. I thought that would be it, a one-time gift. I was wrong. 2 years later, it was Charlotte's student loans. She had a master's in art history, a degree that had left her with a mountain of debt. "We can't get ahead, Eleanor," she'd explained over dinner at their huge, empty dining room table. The room smelled of new paint and money. "The interest rates are just crippling. It feels like we're drowning." Leo sat beside her, nodding, looking miserable. "How much is it?" I asked, my voice quieter this time. $75,000, she said, without blinking. This time, it was my personal savings, the money I'd put aside from my nursing paychecks, $10 here, $20 there, for over 40 years. My independence fund, my I don't have to ask anyone for anything fund. The check I wrote that time felt different, heavier. Charlotte's student loans, $75,000. The next request came a year after that. Leo had an idea for a tech startup, an app that would curate high-end travel experiences. He needed seed money. "It's the next big thing, Mom," he'd said, his eyes alight with a feverish excitement I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "This is my chance to be somebody." To be somebody, I thought, as if he wasn't somebody already. That was the last of Robert's investments, a small portfolio of blue-chip stocks I had been letting grow. It was supposed to be my retirement cushion, the money that would let me live out my years without being a burden to anyone. Leo's startup, $50,000. The startup failed within 18 months. He lost it all. He never spoke of it again. The grand total, when I dared to write it down, was a number that made my breath catch in my throat. $275,000. Nearly everything Robert and I had built, saved, and sacrificed for, poured into their life of gleaming surfaces and hollow echoes, and in return, my invitations to their home grew less frequent. My calls were answered with the short, distracted replies. I became a duty, an obligation, a relic from a past they were trying to erase. Robert died 2 years ago. It was sudden, a heart attack in his sleep. He went peacefully, for which I will always be grateful. The night before he died, he was in his workshop. He came into the house late, smelling of solder and cold night air. He took my hands in his. His were calloused, but all was gentle. "Ellie," he said, his voice serious, "if anything ever happens to me, the notebooks. All the work is in the notebooks." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass key. It was old and ornate. "This is for the bottom drawer of the file cabinet in the garage, the gray one. The most important work is in there. Don't let them just throw it away. Don't let them forget the work. The value is in the work." I held the key in my palm. It felt warm from his hand. "Don't be morbid, Robert," I whispered. He smiled, that quiet, gentle smile. "Humor me," he said. "Promise me." "I promise," I said. And now I was standing in my hallway, the phone a dead weight in my hand, listening to the dial tone buzz in my ear. Leo's words echoed in the sudden, crushing silence. "It's just a bunch of old notebooks. We need the space for the nursery." I looked down at my hand. It was trembling, a fine, almost invisible tremor. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, not with a crash, but with a soft thud as it landed on the worn runner in the hall. On the small entryway table, next to a bowl of keys and loose change, was a glossy pamphlet. The front of it featured a professionally shot photo of Leo and a radiant Charlotte, their arms around each other, smiling. Below them, in elegant green script, it read, "The Future is Green, a fundraiser for the Regional Clean Energy Initiative," an event they were hosting, an event to which I had not been invited. They were raising money for a green future, and they had just thrown away the man who could have given it to them. Something inside me, something that had been soft and yielding for 72 years, began to harden. It was a cold, slow process, like water freezing into ice, molecule by molecule. The grief and confusion that had clouded my mind for 2 years began to recede, replaced by a terrible, piercing clarity. I was not a mother they loved. I was a resource they had exhausted. I was not a grandmother to their unborn child. I was an inconvenience taking up space. My gaze fell on the bowl of keys, tucked away at the very bottom, beneath old house keys and luggage keys and keys to things I no longer owned, was a small, ornate brass key. I walked over, my legs feeling strangely steady, and picked it up. It was cool to the touch now. I closed my fingers around it, the sharp edges of the key pressing into my palm. I remembered Robert's face, his earnest eyes. The value is in the work. I had made a promise, and I intended to keep it. The first call I made was not to Leo. I didn't have the words for him yet. Instead, I looked up the number for the County Historical Society. My hand was perfectly steady as I dialed. A bright, young voice answered. "Chester County Historical, Anya speaking." "Hello," I said, my own voice sounding unfamiliar, clear and precise. "My name is Eleanor Vance. My son, Leo Vance, arranged to donate some materials to you today, a collection of old notebooks. Oh, yes, Mrs. Vance. The Vance collection, she said, her voice full of professional cheer. They just arrived. We're so grateful. It's a wonderful contribution to the local archives. There's been a misunderstanding, I said calmly. The donation was made in error. I am the owner of those notebooks, and I need to retrieve them. There was a pause. Oh, well, that's a bit unusual. The donation form has been signed. Once an item is accessioned. Anya, I said, using her name deliberately. These were the personal effects of my late husband. They have immense sentimental value. My son was overzealous in his cleaning. I assure you, it was a mistake. I can be there in 20 minutes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I stated a fact. There was another, longer pause. I could hear the faint sound of keyboard clicks in the background. Okay, Mrs. Vance, she finally said, her tone shifting from bureaucratic to human. Of course, when you get here, just ask for me. The Historical Society smelled of old paper and lemon polish. It was a quiet, reverent space. Anya was a young woman with bright, intelligent eyes and a cascade of dark curls tied back with a pencil. She led me to a back room where a large cardboard box sat on a metal table. I have to admit, Mrs. Vance, she said, her brow furrowed in thought as she gestured to the box. I took a quick look when they came in. I'm no scientist, but this isn't just a diary. The mathematics in here. She opened one of the notebooks at random. The page was a dizzying, beautiful dance of symbols and graphs. This looks less like history and more like the future. My breath caught. She saw it. A stranger, a young woman with no connection to him, had glanced at his work and seen more than his own son had in a lifetime. Anya seemed to sense my turmoil. She looked from the notebook to my face. My grandfather was a watchmaker, she said softly. He used to fill books with diagrams just like this, tiny, intricate drawings. Everyone told him digital was the future, that his craft was dead. He never listened. He said that true elegance was timeless. She gently closed the notebook. This feels like that. It feels important. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a business card. I don't know what's in these books, but if it's what I think it is, you shouldn't just be storing them. You should be protecting them. A professor from the university gave me this card last month. He said this lawyer was the best in the state for intellectual property. The card was thick, cream-colored stock. The name on it was simple. David Abramson, Patent Law. I took the box of notebooks home. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the one where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals, and I opened the locked bottom drawer of the gray file cabinet in the garage. Inside were 20 more notebooks. These were different. Hardbound, leatherette covers. The paper was thicker, the ink darker. These were the final versions, the polished theories. On the very top was a single thin file folder. Inside was a letter in Robert's hand. "My Ellie," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're looking at the work. I'm sorry I never made a fortune from it. I wasn't brave enough to face the world of business, the compromises, the teaching, the students. That was real to me. This," and I could feel his presence in the words, "was for me, but it's also for you. This is the culmination of it all. The theory of passive thermal conduction. It works. I built a prototype. It's in the attic, in the old steamer trunk. It doesn't look like much, just some rocks on a board. But it works. Don't sell it for pennies, Ellie. Don't let them tell you it's just a hobby. This is my legacy, and now it's yours. Your Robert. Tears streamed down my face then, hot and silent, not from sadness, but from a profound, aching love. He had known. Somehow he had known I would need this. The next morning I called Mr. Abramson. His office smelled of rich leather, old books, and freshly brewed coffee. It was the smell of quiet power. Mr. Abramson was a man in his late 60s with a fringe of white hair and eyes that were both sharp and kind. He listened to my story without interruption, his hand steepled on his large mahogany desk. I didn't cry. I didn't embellish. I simply told him about Robert, about the notebooks, about Leo's phone call. When I was finished, a long silence filled the room. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Vance," he said finally, his voice a low, measured baritone. "May I see the work?" I had brought one of the hard-bound notebooks. I slid it across the polished surface of the desk. He opened it. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft rustle of turning pages. He took off his glasses, polished them, and put them back on. He leaned closer. He pulled a legal pad towards him and began to scribble notes. Not words, but equations of his own, as if he were having a conversation with my husband across the years. Finally, he looked up. The professional calm in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated awe. "Eleanor," he said, using my first name for the first time. "May I call you Eleanor? My father was a machinist. He could build anything from a blueprint. He had a respect for elegant design. That's what this is." He tapped the notebook with his forefinger. "This is the most elegant design I have ever seen. Your husband wasn't a hobbyist. He was a genius, a goddamn poet of thermodynamics. He broke his professional composure for only that single sentence. Then he was all business again. We need to file provisional patents immediately. Before any of this becomes public, we need to document everything. This isn't just one invention. This is a portfolio, a whole new way of thinking about energy." He leaned forward. "This is going to take some time, and it will require a retainer." "How much?" I asked, my heart sinking. "Ordinarily, for a portfolio of this potential, my firm would ask for a significant sum up front. But," he paused, looking at me, "my father was cheated out of an invention once, a tool he designed. He never saw a dime. I will take this on contingency, Eleanor. My fee will be a percentage of whatever we secure, because I have a feeling this is the most important work I will ever do." That was his moment of personal connection, the crack in the professional facade that showed the man beneath. The weeks that followed were a blur of methodical preparation. I spent days with Mr. Abramson and his team, documenting Robert's work. I retrieved the prototype from the attic. It was just as he'd described, a small sheet of plywood onto which a dozen smooth black river stones had been affixed in a specific geometric pattern. It looked like a child's art project. But when one of Mr. Abramson's engineers ran a thermal camera over it in a cold room, the stones glowed on the screen like embers, drawing ambient heat from the air itself. I started taking care of myself. I changed the locks on my doors. The locksmith was a young man with tattoos up his arms. "New locks, new life, eh?" he said cheerfully as he worked. It felt true. I opened a new bank account at a different bank. I shredded all my old financial statements. One afternoon, on a whim, I walked into a department store, a place I hadn't set foot in for years. I walked past the sensible cardigans and orthopedic shoes and bought myself a coat. It was a deep charcoal gray, made of soft, heavy wool. It cost more than my entire wardrobe combined. When I put it on, I felt solid, protected. The inevitable call from Leo came a week before the fundraiser. "Mom, are you there?" His voice was tight with irritation. "I've been calling." "I've been busy, Leo," I said. My voice was calm. "Busy? Doing what?" "Listen, we have a problem. The caterer for Charlotte's event. The cost is more than we budgeted. We're a little short. I need you to help us out. Just a few thousand to tide us over." There it was, the casual assumption, the bottomless well he expected me to be. I thought of the $275,000. I thought of the notebooks in the box. "No," I said. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. It was a silence filled with shock and indignation. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, Leo. I am not giving you any more money." "But it's for the fundraiser. It's for a good cause. Don't you care about that?" "I care a great deal about clean energy," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. "More than you could possibly imagine. But my bank account is no longer at your disposal. You will have to manage on your own." "What's gotten into you?" he sputtered. "You're being weird. Is this about the notebooks? I told you, the Historical Society was thrilled." "Goodbye, Leo," I said, and I gently placed the receiver back in its cradle, cutting him off mid-sentence. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the phone, and I felt a strange lightness. It wasn't joy. It was the feeling of a great weight being lifted from my shoulders. It was the first small victory. The invitation to the fundraiser arrived 2 days later, by courier. A passive-aggressive summons. It was clear Charlotte had insisted he send it, to maintain appearances. It was printed on the same thick, glossy cardstock as the pamphlet. I ran my thumb over my name. Mrs. Eleanor Vance. I was an afterthought, a prop. I placed it on the mantelpiece, right next to a framed photo of Robert, and I decided I would go. The night before the party, a wave of doubt washed over me. It was sudden and sickening, like a fever. I found myself in the garage, standing in front of Robert's workbench. The air was cold, and the familiar smells of solder and dust were faint, like memories. I ran my hand over the scarred wood, the gouges and stains where he had worked for so many years. My eyes fell on a faded photograph tacked to the wall. It was of a 6-year-old Leo sitting on Robert's lap, his small hand on top of his father's, as Robert showed him how to wire a simple circuit with a battery and a small light bulb. Leo's face was a study in concentration, his brow furrowed, his tongue sticking out of the corner of his mouth. He wasn't the man who had dismissed his father's life's work. He was just a little boy, captivated by a small spark of light. What was I doing? Was I destroying my family for the sake of revenge? Was I about to humiliate my only son, the father of my grandchild, in front of all his friends? A wave of grief hit me, so powerful it made me dizzy. Grief for the little boy in the photograph. Grief for the man he had become. Grief for the family I had thought I had, the one that had only existed in my own heart. I sank onto Robert's old wooden stool, my head in my hands. The cold of the garage seeped into my bones. For a long, long time, I questioned everything. Maybe I should just let it go. Let them have their shallow lives. I could live quietly on the initial payments from the patents, honor Robert in my own way. Why did it have to be a public spectacle? Then I remembered Charlotte's voice, dripping with condescension. Your home is so cozy. I remembered Leo's voice on the phone, the casual cruelty of it. It's just a bunch of old notebooks. They weren't just erasing Robert, they were erasing me. They were erasing the love, the sacrifice, the very foundations of our lives, and replacing it with a hollow performance of success. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. It was about honoring a great man. It was about the promise I had made. My resolve hardened again, this time for good. I stood up and walked back into the house. I went to my closet and took out a dress I'd owned for years, a simple charcoal gray sheath that Robert had always loved. It was understated, elegant, and timeless. I laid it out on the bed. Then I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the wrinkles around my eyes, the silver in my hair. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't see a frail old woman. I saw Eleanor Vance. I saw Robert's wife. I saw a woman who knew the value of things. And I was ready. I picked up my keys from the bowl. They felt solid and real in my hand. The house was exactly as I had imagined it, only colder. Gleaming white marble floors, vast white walls punctuated by oversized, abstract art that seemed to shout its price tag. The air was thick with a competing sense of expensive perfume, champagne, and something sterile, like floor polish. A string quartet sawed away in a corner, their music a thin veneer of civility over the loud, brittle chatter of the guests. Leo saw me first. He was wearing a tuxedo that looked a size too tight, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. His eyes widened in a brief flash of panic. "Mom, you came." "You invited me," I said quietly. Before he could respond, Charlotte swept in. She was a vision in a shimmering, backless gown of silver sequins, her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate twist. She looked like a movie star, and she knew it. "Eleanor!" she exclaimed, her voice a theatrical boom. She kissed the air beside my cheek. "So glad you could make it. You look comfortable." She gave my simple gray dress a dismissive glance. "The bar is over there, and there are some chairs by the French doors. Try to find a seat. We're expecting the mayor any minute." She was dismissing me, sending me to the corner like a misbehaving child, a shabby piece of furniture she didn't want cluttering up her perfect room. "Thank you, Charlotte," I said, my voice even. "I'm fine right here." I watched them work the room. Charlotte was in her element, her laughter loud and practiced, her hand touching arms, her head tilted at just the right angle. She was holding court, performing her role as the gracious, powerful hostess. Leo followed in her wake, looking pale and anxious, nodding and smiling, a ghost at his own party. About an hour in, Charlotte stepped onto a small, makeshift stage, a microphone in her hand. The string quartet fell silent. A hush fell over the room. "Welcome, friends," she began, her voice resonating with false warmth. "Thank you all for coming to support our collective green future. We believe that here, in this community, we can be leaders in sustainability and renewable energy. It's about investing in the future for our children." She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. A murmur of approval went through the crowd. She spoke for 10 minutes, using words like synergy, paradigm, and eco-conscious. But it was all surface, a speech polished to a high gloss, but utterly devoid of substance. As she was winding down, basking in the applause, I saw the caterer, a harried-looking woman in a black uniform, approach her at the side of the stage. The woman whispered something in Charlotte's ear. I was too far away to hear, but I saw the shift in Charlotte's posture. The radiant smile faltered. Her face, for just a second, went tight with annoyance. She stepped off the stage and followed the caterer to a discreet corner. I saw her pull a slim, platinum-colored credit card from her tiny silver clutch. She handed it over. The caterer swiped it through a small, handheld machine. She swiped it again. She shook her head. Charlotte's face began to pale beneath her expensive makeup. She snatched the card back and handed over another, this one a sleek black. The caterer swiped it. The same result. A small, tense silence grew around them as a few nearby guests began to notice the transaction was not going smoothly. Her card was declined. In front of her friends, her donors, the people whose opinions were the very currency of her existence. The public performance of wealth had just hit a brick wall. The carefully constructed facade was cracking. The whispers started, quiet and lethal. That was the moment. The silence was my cue. I moved from my spot by the wall, walking calmly through the crowd. A path seemed to open before me. All eyes were on Charlotte's crumbling composure, and now on the old woman in the simple gray dress walking toward her. "Perhaps I can help," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmuring. Charlotte looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and humiliation. "Eleanor, this is not the time." "I think," I said, my voice soft but firm, "it's the perfect time." I reached the small glass table in the center of the hushed group. I reached into the pocket of my old wool coat, the one I had left on. My fingers closed around a small, smooth object. It was one of the river stones from Robert's prototype. I had been holding it all evening, and it had absorbed the warmth of my hand. I placed it on the glass table. It didn't make a loud noise, but in the dead silence of the room, the sound was a solid, definitive click. Everyone looked at the stone. "Charlotte," I began, my voice changing. It was no longer the voice of a woman asking permission to exist. It was the voice of a teacher, the voice of Robert's wife. "You spoke tonight about a green future, a laudable goal. Tell me, what do you know about the Peltier effect?" She stared at me blankly. "What? Or the Seebeck effect? Or the principles of non-convective thermal transfer? You talk about investing in the future, but you don't even understand the language of the present." I turned my gaze to my son. Leo was staring at me, his face ashen. "Leo, your father spent 30 years of his life charting that future in his notebooks, the notebooks you gave away because you needed space for a nursery." A gasp went through the small crowd. "You called them just a bunch of old notebooks. You dismissed your father's life's work as a hobby. You saw his genius and called it failure because it didn't come with a stock portfolio and a house made of glass and steel." I let the words hang in the air. The silence in the room was absolute now. It was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. "Those notebooks," I continued, my voice low and clear, contained the complete theoretical framework and practical application for a revolutionary technology, a technology that allows for the passive transfer of thermal energy, a way to heat and cool buildings using almost no power at all, the work of a lifetime. I paused, then delivered the final blow. "You discarded those notebooks as worthless. I, however, did not. I engaged a lawyer. We filed the patents, and last week we accepted an acquisition offer from the Kestrel Corporation, one of the largest technology firms in the world." I watched Charlotte's face. The color drained from it completely, leaving a sallow, waxy mask. Her hands, holding the useless credit cards, began to tremble. They called Robert's work the most significant breakthrough in applied thermodynamics in a century. They believe the man you dismissed as a small-town teacher has, in large part, solved a global energy crisis. Their initial offer was in the high 8 figures. I let that number settle. But it will be more, much more. I looked from Charlotte's shattered expression to my son's. Leo looked like he couldn't breathe. His eyes were fixed on my face, filled with a dawning catastrophic understanding. They asked what the technology should be called, I said, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. I told them to call it the Robert Vance Principle. There it was, the mic drop, the truth laid bare on a platter of their own making. I didn't wait for a reaction. There was nothing more to say. The silence I left behind was louder than any shouting could ever be. I turned, and with a dignity I hadn't felt in years, I walked out of that cold white house. I didn't look back. The cool night air on my face felt like a benediction. I walked out into the cool, clean air of the night. The moon was a perfect silver disk in the sky. I breathed it in, the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. The tension that had been coiled in my spine for months, for years, finally unspooled. I didn't go home. I couldn't bear the thought of my own quiet rooms just yet. I drove, aimlessly at first, until I saw the warm, yellow glow of an all-night diner. I slid into a cracked red vinyl booth. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and frying bacon, a smell that was honest and real. A waitress with a lived-in face and a name tag that read Flo ambled over, a coffee pot in her hand. "Rough night, hon?" she asked, pouring the dark liquid into a thick ceramic mug without waiting for an answer. "Something like that," I murmured, wrapping my cold hands around the mug's warmth. She leaned against the counter, her expression knowing. "Saw a man in here once, crying into his pancakes. Found out his wife ran off with his brother. An hour later, a different fella comes in, grinning like an idiot. Just won $5,000 on a scratch-off. You see it all in a place like this." She topped off my coffee. "Thing is, every story feels like the end of the world to the person living it. But the world keeps spinning." She paused, wiping a clean spot on the counter with her rag. "Sometimes," she said, her voice dropping a little, "you gotta burn the whole field down just to get a clean start for spring. Doesn't mean you don't mourn the crop you lost." Her words, so simple and direct, landed in my heart with a quiet thud. She didn't know my story, but she knew the truth of it. I sat there for an hour, drinking coffee, watching the occasional truck rumble by on the dark highway. I mourned the crop I had lost. I mourned the son I thought I had, the family that had been a mirage. When I finally picked up my phone, there was one new message. It was from Leo. The text was short, 3 sentences. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I went to the Historical Society. I didn't understand. I didn't reply." He came to the house 3 days later. He didn't call first, just appeared on my doorstep. He looked diminished. The arrogant gloss was gone. He was thinner, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, just jeans and a simple sweater. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood on the porch, his hands jammed in his pockets. "I read some of it," he said, his voice hoarse. "At the archives. The notebooks I gave them. I only understood maybe 1 word in 10. But I saw the drawings, the care he took." He looked up at me, his eyes full of a pain that was, for the first time, genuine. "He was trying to show me, wasn't he? All those years. With the marbles, the circuits. He was trying to share it with me, and I just I thought it was silly. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for money. He didn't make excuses. He held out a flat, rectangular object wrapped in brown paper. "This is for you." I took it. It was a simple black frame. Inside, behind glass, was not a photograph, but a perfect, hand-drawn copy of one of Robert's diagrams from the notebooks. It was a complex schematic of a thermal array, rendered in precise, clean lines. It must have taken him hours. It was an act of contrition, an act of seeing. "I want to understand, Mom," he said quietly. "I want to know who he was." Tears pricked my eyes. I opened the screen door. "Come in, Leo." Later, before he left, I went to the cedar chest in the hallway. I took out the old leather satchel, the one Robert had used to carry his notebooks to and from the school. The leather was worn soft as cloth, the brass buckles tarnished. I had offered it to Leo when he graduated college, and he had scoffed, preferring a sleek, modern briefcase. I held it out to him now. "Your father would have wanted you to have this," I said, "when you were ready." He took it from me, his fingers tracing the worn strap. He held it not like an accessory, but like a sacrament. "What about Charlotte?" I asked, the first time I had said her name. He looked away, out the window at the garden. "She's staying with her mother. She doesn't understand any of this. She just keeps asking how much money there is." He shook his head, a gesture of profound weariness. "It was never about the work for her. It was only ever about the money." "I know," I said. "Forgiveness is a complicated thing. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward. The work is what matters, Leo. It's all that ever mattered. A year has passed. The world is different now, and so am I. With a portion of the initial payment from Kestrel, I established the Vance Foundation for Applied Physics. Its mission is simple: to support and fund the quiet geniuses, the high school teachers, the garage tinkerers who are changing the world without applause. I don't sit in a leather chair in a high-rise boardroom. I sit on the board, yes, but my real work is here. Here is a brightly lit classroom at a local high school, the kind of school Robert would have loved. It smells of chalk dust and youthful energy. I'm watching a 16-year-old girl named Maya demonstrate her project for the first Vance Foundation grant. She's nervous, but brilliant. Her project is a miniature house, a dollhouse really, and on its roof is a small, neat array of black river stones affixed to a panel. She flips a switch on a powerful heat lamp positioned over the roof. "This is our sun," she explains. Then she opens a little bag of baking soda. "And this is a freak snowstorm." She sprinkles the white powder over the entire roof. The half of the roof without the stones is covered in white. The half with the stones, the snow melts the instant it touches the surface. It sizzles and disappears, leaving the black stones clean and dry, radiating a gentle, visible heat, a small miracle of passive thermal conduction. "It works," she whispers, a huge, brilliant smile spreading across her face. I feel a hand on my shoulder. It's Leo. He works for the foundation now. His job is to take his father's dense academic notebooks and translate them into accessible educational materials, lesson plans that teachers like Maya's can use. He's quieter now, more thoughtful. The frantic, grasping energy is gone, replaced by a calm sense of purpose. He has his father's eyes. "He would have been so proud of her," Leo says, his voice thick with emotion. "He would have been so proud of you," I reply, and I mean it. Later, as the students are packing up, I walk over to the model. I pick up one of the small black river stones from the roof panel. It's cool to the touch now. It's work done for the day. It's a simple, unassuming object, a piece of the earth, but I know what it holds. I close my hand around it, feeling its weight, its smoothness, its dormant potential. I feel the echo of Robert's dream, the quiet, persistent power of an idea whose time has finally come. The legacy is safe, and that is more than enough. Did this story resonate with you? I find that sharing our stories, even the painful ones, can make the world feel a little smaller, a little warmer. I love hearing what city you're in as you listen. It's a reminder that we're all connected, each of us with a story to tell.